Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. The sights are festive this time of year in the latter part of December. There's the parade of cut and shaped conifers going down the streets, tied to the tops of cars or hanging out the backs of pickup trucks. And in the world of outdoor holiday decorations in mild climates, what can be more festive than passing neighborhood citrus trees, showcasing their bounty of oranges, mandarins, lemons, and other sweet, healthy treats? Today, we talk about Christmas tree care. How can you keep those needles looking fresh while on display in your living room? And we'll talk about living Christmas trees as well. And those citrus trees may look healthy from a distance, but get a little bit closer and their problems become obvious. We tackle two issues facing many citrus tree owners right now: yellowing leaves and splitting fruit. We're podcasting from Barking Dog Studios here in the beautiful Abutilon jungle in suburban Purgatory. It's the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, brought to you today by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Let's go. So are you moving the Christmas tree around? Do you have one tied to your car right now while you're listening? Are you going to put it indoors? Where are you going to put that Christmas tree? And how do you keep basically a dead tree looking green? It just so happens that in a recent article in the Sacramento Digs Gardening newsletter, Debbie Arrington, Kathy Morrison came up with some ideas on how to keep your Christmas tree looking green. Debbie Arrington is with us. And Debbie, how do you keep your Christmas tree looking healthy, merry, and green?
Well, think of your Christmas tree like you would any cut flower. It needs water. And the way to get water is to put it in a sturdy stand that can hold about a quart of water at least. The taller the tree, the more water it needs. According to the National Christmas Tree Association, you need 1 quart of water per inch of trunk diameter. And so make sure that the stand can hold that much, and then check it every day. Because if the trunk dries out, resin starts forming and it blocks the uptake of more water, and the tree will just dry out like a flower would dry out if the vase ran out of water. What about additives? Do they do any good? Apparently, research that the National Christmas Tree Association shared shows that clean water works best. Home remedies like adding aspirin or bleach or corn syrup or sugar or a can of 7-Up or, whatever, they didn't make any difference. And in fact, the corn syrup and stuff attracted bugs, so that wasn't good. If you are driving home from the Christmas tree lot right now with that tree tied to the roof of your car, one thing you need to do before you bring it in the house, shake it out and get all the bugs off, but also maybe cut off a ½ inch or an inch of the bottom of the stem to allow some clean uptake from that water. Yes, because that resin that blocks the flow of uptake, it's already formed while that tree was sitting there waiting for somebody to take it home. The Tree Association actually says that you should cut off at least 1 inch to restore the flow and let the water come back up. And that water thing isn't just an occasional check. That's something that you have to check every day to make sure that the stand's basin is full. Yes, check it every morning. And you'll be surprised how much water that tree will uptake. And that's one of my big issues with a lot of Christmas tree stands. They aren't big enough and don't hold enough water, so I would choose a tree stand that could hold probably a gallon of water or so. Yes, yeah. If you have a full-size 6-foot tree, you probably do need a stand that could hold a gallon of water. And a gallon sounds like a lot, but, you look at a gallon of milk. That's how big of a reservoir you need on that stand. Yeah. Now, you've got the tree off the car. You've cut off part of that trunk or that 1 inch or so. You've got the stand set up. Where is the best place in the house to put a Christmas tree, or what should you avoid? Well, the best place to put the tree is someplace that will stay cool and away from direct light. Lots of folks like to put their tree in the front window so everybody can see it. But if that window is facing west or south, it's going to cook the tree. It prefers much more having some place where it is away from direct light and also away from heat. You don't want to be anywhere near a heater vent because that just sucks the moisture right out of the tree. If the tree is in a nice cool corner, it will retain its needles much longer.
Yeah, that's the key, is keeping the needles on. They haven't come up with a cure yet on how to keep cats out of Christmas tree ornaments yet.
No, that's why we have a tabletop tree, and the cat knows that she can't get up on that table or she's in a lot of trouble.
All right. And again, I guess the really big point is with the Christmas tree, be it a dead tree or even a living tree, make sure that there is water there.
Yes. And that's the thing with a living tree is evergreens don't like to be indoors. And here you've got a big potted fir or spruce or pine, and you've lugged it inside, and it is not in its natural habitat, and it is desperate for light. Evergreens are all full sun trees. They are not meant to be out inside where a tropical plant might live. And so if you do have a living tree, give it as much light as possible, preferably in a sunny window, and make sure it gets watered every day. And then get it outside as soon as possible because it will be much happier outdoors. But when you return it outdoors, don't just plunge it into full sun and freezing temperatures. You've got to gradually bring it back outside, probably on a covered patio, where it can readjust to outside temperatures and light.
And you make a very good point. Now, here we're talking about living Christmas trees that you want to perhaps bring back into the house for the following Christmas. You want to choose a tree variety that is going to like your neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So choose a variety that is adapted to your climate. And there are some interesting little Christmas trees out there, living Christmas trees that are actually rosemary plants.
Yes, and your Christmas tree doesn't have to be an evergreen. It can be some other kind of evergreen, like that doesn't lose its leaves, like a rosemary plant doesn't lose its leaves. It doesn't have to necessarily be a conifer, I guess would be the proper term. Yeah, you can have lots of different things to be your Christmas tree. I've seen them in rosemaries, and I've seen different herbal ones, topiary ones, where they took a privet or some other type of hedging plant and then cut it into the shape of a Christmas tree. Christmas trees, they are decoration, and they are a way of bringing some of the life from outside inside and make us merry and bright. You can be creative. You don't have to necessarily have a fir as your Christmas tree.
Exactly. Just buy yourself a good pair of pruning shears, because if it is a rosemary or some other sort of hedging plant, it will need consistent pruning to maintain that Christmas tree shape.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So put that on your Christmas list. Pair of good pruners. Debbie Arrington, Sacramento Digs Gardening is the publication that comes out every day. And if people want to check out Sacramento Digs Gardening, we'll have a link in the show notes to it. But if you want to do an internet search, how do you do it?
Look up Sacramento Digs Gardening, and we were formerly on Blogspot, but we're now on CalLocal. So look for SacramentoDigsGardening.CaliforniaLocal.com.
There you go, Debbie Arrington. Have yourself a merry little Christmas.
Thank you very much. Happy holidays.
Smart Pots. It's the original award-winning fabric planter. It's sold worldwide, and Smart Pots are proudly made 100% in the USA. Smart Pots, by the way, are BPA-free with no risk of chemicals leaching into your soil, your herbs, vegetables, and other edibles. That's why organic growers prefer Smart Pots, and they last for years. Some gardeners have been using the same Smart Pots for over a decade. Smart Pot's breathable fabric creates a healthy root structure for plants. Because the fabric breathes, Smart Pots are better suited than plastic pots, especially for really hot and really cold climates. And unlike a plastic pot, the fabric won't crack or break from frost or when dropped. For more information, visit smartpots.com/Fred. And don't forget that /Fred part, because on that page are details of discounts when you buy Smart Pots at Amazon. Visit smartpots.com/Fred. It's not just this time of year. It's almost any time of year where USDA Zone 9 gardeners are complaining about their citrus leaves. Why are they turning yellow? Yellowing citrus leaves could be due to any number of things, including, shall we say, operator error. Let's bring in somebody who knows something about citrus. That would be Quentin Young, Sacramento County Master Gardener. How do you want to put this?
I'm the project co-lead of the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center demonstration orchard.
We'll leave it at that. Okay. And in the orchard area at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center, Q, there are many citrus trees, including a beautiful row of citrus trees towards the back. And I'm sure you see yellowing leaves, and you get a lot of questions, too, on open workshop days at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center from people wondering, what's wrong with my citrus tree? Why are the leaves turning yellow? And whenever I get asked that question, I would say, well, tell me about the yellowing, because that's the way of the pattern of the yellow is going to tell you a lot about what's wrong.
That is true. There's lots of online resources where you can actually see the pattern of the yellowing to see whether it's iron or nitrogen, magnesium. There's quite a few nutrient deficiencies. I find that with most homeowners, feeding is sometimes a problem because they don't follow, let's say, the directions. Usually at the Hort Center, we feed our citrus in ground once a year. We feed our citrus in the containers every month. So depending on where you have the tree can sometimes determine the kind of coloring problems that you might have.
And add to that the problem of growing citrus in containers, as so many people do, and that eases them through the frost season because they can move the container closer to the house and offer it some heat from a reflected west-facing or south-facing wall. Like you mentioned, yeah, if it's in a container, it probably needs to be watered more frequently and fertilized more frequently. But it's the frequency and not the amount.
That is correct. So I always say follow the directions on what it says on the container, depending on whether you're using organic or conventional fertilizers. But follow the directions. But monthly feedings, I found, makes a big difference for not just the appearance of the tree, but also the productivity of the tree as well.
Is this true with most citrus trees? I think I've had questions on just about every citrus imaginable and the yellowing leaves.
In containers, yes. In the ground, a lot of it, it depends on what sort of environmental factors. Is it, people, I think, sometimes have a bad habit of putting citrus trees in lawns. They don't like that. They don't like the regular watering that they get from a sprinkler system. If you're putting down lawn fertilizer, let's say too much, or using a weed and feed, that can affect it. They don't like our heavy clay soil. So if they're sitting in soggy soil, you'll see a lot of yellowing of the leaves. And then going into winter, as the ground temperatures start to cool, the citrus trees have a harder time pulling nitrogen from the soil, so they'll naturally start yellowing. So you have to be a little bit prepared for that as well.
That's a double-edged sword, of course, because if you are seeing yellowing leaves in the wintertime and your diagnosis is, it's a nitrogen deficiency, you really don't want to fertilize it when the soil temperatures are so cold. You want to wait till spring, because if you added that fertilizer now, there could be a salt buildup, and that just results in more yellowing leaves.
Exactly. And then hopefully we'll have a nice rainy winter. Most of that nitrogen is probably going to get washed through the soil because it doesn't stay around very well.
Right. Well, what is your pattern for fertilizing in-ground citrus at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center?
We usually wait till the ground warms up. We shoot for sort of March, April, depending on what the temperature is like. And then we'll feed our citrus a combination of Nutri-Rich, which is a pelletized chicken manure. You can get it at most of your local nurseries here in the Sacramento area. It doesn't have very high numbers, 432, but we like it because it doesn't burn. But we also use blood meal, and the blood meal is 1300, and that helps green up the plants for the spring and summer.
But again, you're only applying it then probably from late winter through late summer.
We're only doing it one. We used to do two applications, but for now we just do it in March/April, depending on the weather. And we don't do our second fertilizing anymore because we're kind of following best practices for the drought, and we don't want to have a lot of new leafy growth that we have to supplement with additional irrigation.
Yeah, and especially this time of year, you don't want that new growth which might be susceptible to a winter frost.
Yes, and again, that's the other debate we're having at the Hort Center, whether we're going to go through our big ordeal of pulling out all our frost material and all of our Christmas tree lights because we don't seem to have used them the last couple of years.
Yeah, I'm wondering about that and the new USDA zone maps that have come out. The USDA has updated their USDA zone maps. There is now a 2023 edition. And one thing you can see on these maps, if you compare the 2023 plant hardiness zone map to the last edition, which was 2012, I think, you see creeping heat moving south to north at areas in the Midwest and back east that were zone 5 may now be zone 6, for example.
Exactly. Yeah. So we've noticed the last couple of years, even though I haven't covered my citrus probably at least 3 or 4 years. And here at my house, we haven't really had any kind of freeze or frost damage at the Hort Center. So we're literally, usually around Thanksgiving is when we start pulling out all the frost materials. We still haven't done it yet, and we're still having the debate whether we're going to go through that for this year.
Yeah, it depends on the frequency and the duration, if you will, of colder temperatures in the morning. Generally, if it's just a light frost, if it's only 31, 32 degrees, maybe if they're in ground, maybe just watering it and mulching it might suffice.
And ours are pretty established. I think maybe we have one very, very young tree, so that would be the exception to the rule. But all the other ones are probably 2013 would be the youngest. So that one's most of them are at least 10 years old and older. So the more established they get, the less problem they have with the cold.
And one of the most common causes of yellow leaves, and we've sort of hinted at it, but it's overwatering. And if you plant in heavy soil, when soil is continually wet, especially in the wintertime, the roots can't function, so nutrients can't reach the leaves.
Exactly. They can't get oxygen, and then they get kind of yellow and limp, and you think it needs more water, and you just make the problem worse.
You want to use a soil moisture probe to monitor and water the trees when needed. And if you can, let the top 3 inches of the soil dry a bit before watering again.
Especially in the wintertime. Yeah, there's really no reason to be irrigating. We've shut off most of the irrigation of the orchard at this point, except for some of the things in wine barrels that may not be catching natural precipitation. We've pretty much shut everything off.
Exactly. If it's in a container, it's a different set of rules.
Yeah, and I have maybe 13 or 14 citrus trees at home in pots. I think I'm watering them maybe once every 10 days, just giving them a drink to make sure they don't dry out.
And you've found this out the hard way. Sometimes the roots of the tree can be blocking the holes in the bottom of a pot, so you need to check those holes to make sure they're open and the plant soil is draining.
That's an excellent winter project or fall project, is look at all your citrus or fruit trees that are in containers, move the container and make sure that the roots haven't grown through the drain holes and clogged up. Because what will happen is we'll have 3 or 4 days of a really good rain. You won't notice it, but that pot will fill up with water, and then that plant will start to drown.
And what does it do before it drowns? The leaves turn yellow. And what does a homeowner think? Oh, yellow leaves, I better water it.
Exactly. And then you get that really stinky and anaerobic decomposition smell.
Yes. All right. So, yeah, watch your watering. And one little tip for trees in containers is maybe have an air gap at the bottom. Basically set that pot. If you got the pot, don't let it sit on the ground, but raise it up, put it on some bricks or some 2x4s or something to have an air space to let the roots know that there's no soil here. Go back some other place.
Yeah, perfect idea. Yeah.
The yellowing, too, as you mentioned, could be due to a nitrogen deficiency, and that's the most common cause. The leaves throughout the tree might be light green to yellow with yellow veins. New leaves are small and thin. Mature leaves might have irregular yellow blotches, and then the leaves might turn completely yellow and fall. And the answer to that is, nitrogen is a fertilizer. So come fertilizer time, put something on with nitrogen like you do with blood meal.
Exactly.
Now, having said that, I think as a former nursery person, the advice that a lot of people want to hear is when they come in and say, oh, the leaves on my citrus tree are turning yellow. What's wrong? What can I buy to stop that? Somebody might try to sell them a bag of iron or an iron-based fertilizer because they're saying it's chlorosis, which is an iron deficiency. But that's a different kind of yellow, isn't it?
It is a different kind of yellow, and that's why I always say look at the picture guides on the internet to try to match your leaf to that. Sometimes chlorosis does happen here in Sacramento, usually in tandem with alkaline soil. The more acidic the soil, the more easily accessible the iron can be. So maybe test your soil, maybe use most of the, like ironite has soil sulfur in it, so it'll also help acidify the soil. So it really just depends. You have to ask a couple questions to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, and I think the key to determining that it is an iron deficiency is if the plant leaf has yellow leaves with green veins. If the veins stay green, chances are it might be an iron deficiency. But we should emphasize that it's not necessarily a deficiency of iron in the soil. It's the process of getting it from the soil to the tree via the roots that might be the problem.
Exactly.
And that, again, would be due, like you mentioned, to too much alkalinity or excess salinity, which might be due to over-fertilization.
Yeah, and a lot of it depends on location. Where are you? What's your soil like?
When you choose a fertilizer for citrus trees, if you buy one specifically made from citrus, chances are that fertilizer will have micronutrients in it that might contain iron, zinc, and manganese. But I think it's important to remember that only helps the new growth. It's not going to be absorbed by the older leaves.
That is correct. Again, my citrus ones in the containers every month, and I do, like you said, use a citrus fertilizer because of the micronutrients are really important.
I mentioned zinc and manganese deficiencies because both those deficiencies can be prominent, especially in new growth, where you might have pale green leaves with dark green veins or maybe yellow mottling between the green veins, and you might see some dieback as well.
That's true. And again, it depends on where you are, the age of your citrus tree, what your soil is like, what your irrigation is like. Again, if you take those leaves into a nursery, hopefully they'll ask you lots of questions like that.
Right. And we should point out, too, that when we say manganese, we're not talking magnesium. That's a whole other problem, but that can affect citrus as well. A magnesium deficiency has yellowing that begins at the leaf edges and the tips, and it progresses inward. Then eventually the entire leaf is yellow, except for a green inverted V at the leaf base.
Yeah, then I find that most homeowners, again, they will overthink these, but again, look at the picture guides on the internet. Most people don't have as complicated of these problems as they think they have.
And let's not forget, speaking of operator error, if you're spraying weed killer and that herbicide you're using might have glyphosate in it, you could end up with some pretty funky looking citrus leaves.
That's correct. And if you're putting down a lot of weed and feed, lawn products as well, and your citrus tree is in the lawn, you could also have some problems as well.
All right. That's why we always recommend if the only place you can plant that citrus tree is in the middle of a lawn, you want to clear out that lawn probably for a diameter of 6 feet at least, and just have mulch growing in there near the tree.
Yeah, don't try even putting flowers under there. Citrus, they have very delicate surface roots. They don't like competing with other plants.
Oh, once again, it's all about the soil. It's all about the water. Those yellowing citrus leaves, it could be any number of things. We'll have a link to the University of California's site that has pictures of these yellowing leaves and what possibly may be the cause. So look for that in the notes for this episode. Sacramento County Master Gardener Quentin Young, we've been helping green up your citrus trees. Q, thanks for all your help today.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Fred.
Now Now's the time to plan the what and the where of what you want to plant for the future. And to help you along, it pays to visit your favorite independently owned nursery on a regular basis throughout the fall and winter just to see what's new. And coming soon to that nursery near you is Dave Wilson Nursery's excellent lineup of farmers market favorites, great tasting, healthy fruit and nut varieties. They'll already be potted up and ready to be planted. And we're also talking about a great selection of antioxidant-rich fruits, such as blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, goji berries, grapes, kiwi, mulberries, gooseberries, figs, and pomegranates. Wholesale grower Dave Wilson Nursery has probably the best lineup of great tasting fruit and nut trees of any grower in the United States. Find out more at their website, davewilson.com. And while you're there, check out all the videos they have on how to plant and grow all their delicious varieties of fruit and nut trees. Plus, at davewilson.com, you can find the nursery nearest you that carries Dave Wilson's plants. Your harvest to better health begins at davewilson.com. We like to answer your garden questions here on the Garden Basics podcast. Debbie Flower is here, America's favorite retired college horticultural professor here in California. In many parts of USDA Zone 9 and 10, people grow citrus trees.
They sure do.
Yeah. And this time of year, you may start seeing citrus split.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a question that comes in from Mary Jane, who doesn't mention where she lives, but probably somewhere where you can grow citrus. All right. And she says, hello, I read your valuable information faithfully, but this is the first time I am contacting you for advice. My fabulous navel orange tree has oranges about the size of tennis balls now, but several of them are splitting open long before maturing. What is your take on that situation? And again, ladies and gentlemen, if you're writing in with a garden question, please tell us where you're writing from so we can more correctly pinpoint the correct answer, because for all I know, Mary Jane, you live in a condo in Milwaukee and you're growing this indoors.
Could be.
But I doubt that probably wouldn't happen indoors.
Unless
you'd have to really mistreat that plant.
Yes.
Something seriously.
Suddenly changed what you're doing.
Yeah. So I'll figure that this orange tree is growing outside and you live in USDA Zone 9. All right. Generally, splitting occurs with wild swings in the weather combined with irregular irrigation and erratic fertilization. My go-to answer when the problem, in this case, an abiotic disorder, is mulch, mulch, mulch.
Right. I agree with all of that, except be careful how much you mulch right under the tree.
Right.
When I was doing some consulting, I visited numerous citrus trees that just weren't looking good. That was what the people would tell me. They just don't look as good as they used to. They're getting some extra yellow leaves and such. And these were, all the trees I saw this way had branches almost to the ground. And I got on my belly and climbed underneath those things and found that a tremendous buildup of mulch, typically citrus leaves that had fallen off because evergreen trees do lose their leaves over time, and collected around the base of the trunk. And I cleaned those away from the base of the trunk, and the trees got better.
And we all lived happily ever after, right?
So that's something to monitor on a citrus. You don't want the mulch, even if it's natural mulch of the tree, dropping its own leaves to collect up around the trunk of the tree. But 2 inches of mulch is an excellent idea. Thickness, right under the tree. Yeah, thickness.
Yeah.
Right.
And it probably should extend from maybe 2 inches away from the trunk all the way out to the outer canopy of the tree.
All right. Keep that trunk clear.
So that can moderate soil temperature and soil moisture, because why these navel oranges especially split is the wild swings in probably moisture, heat, wind.
Right. So the trees flower in spring.
Mm-hmm.
And you have that lovely fragrance all over the yard. And then they set fruit. And then the fruit get bigger and bigger and bigger. And around early fall, September, October, the rinds of the citrus are formed and fully sized. And if the fruit inside gets a mass of water infusion, and that can be due to fertilizer, because fertilizer dissolves in water and causes more water to go into the fruit, or it can be because especially with climate change, we're getting massive rainfalls all at once. So you can get a whole lot of water all at once, and that pumps the water into the fruit, and the fruit gets so big it causes the rind to bust.
I'm thinking.
I see the smoke.
Yes. Other problems, too, that can cause fruit to crack like that would be if it's a young tree, because maybe the roots are more shallow. And the tree is rather small. If it has a small, shallow root system, and trees grown in very sandy or porous soils that don't retain moisture well, may be more susceptible to fruit splitting. Yeah, that's, again, maybe it's growing in a raised bed. And again, you've got to think of raised beds like you would a large container plant, and provide more moisture more often.
And citrus are good container plants if you use like a half barrel.
Yeah.
But when you water it, the media gets really wet, and then when it dries out, it gets really dry. You go from extreme to extreme, and that kind of thing can lead to the splitting fruit.
I have a premonition you're about to use the phrase weekly. Fertilizer can also be a problem, too. If people over-fertilize, that can cause splitting as well.
Yes, it can. Right. It causes the plant to act differently because there are now salts in its water environment. And so that can lead to extra water getting to the fruit and causing splitting.
I'd like to point out, too, at this point, that when we say salts in fertilizer, both inorganic and organic fertilizers have salts.
They have to.
Yeah.
That's the way the nutrients dissolve in water and travel to the plant and through the plant. Has to be in a form that can dissolve in water, and salts dissolve in water. So it's just the chemical makeup of the nutrient. It doesn't mean it's sodium chloride. That would kill the plant really fast.
I'm going to pull out this weekly tooth as hard as it takes me. So how do you fertilize a citrus plant in a container?
Well, you said it, weekly. Use citrus fertilizer.
Okay.
And I'm only aware of granular citrus fertilizer. How about you?
I use fish emulsion on everything.
Okay. Yeah, right. And that works.
Yeah.
Somewhat critical thing with citrus is you need micronutrients, which would be present in fish emulsion. And if you're using a refined fertilizer that you buy in a bag that's made for citrus, you'll notice if you look at the active ingredients that there are micronutrients in there, including iron and manganese and those sorts of things. A general fertilizer is not always the best thing for citrus.
What about time-released fertilizers?
I use time-released fertilizers for convenience. They will say that they last, let's say, 30 days or 90 days, something like that. That time that they list on the label is if the media is moist and at about room temperature for that entire span of time. So if it's a container that's outside in the summer and the container gets up to 90 degrees, it's going to release more fertilizer than it would if it was colder, or if it's a cool spell, it'll release less fertilizer. In many cases, that coordinates with the growth of the plant, but typically on the hot end of it, not so much.
If you see splitting oranges on the tree, probably the best thing you can do is remove them.
Absolutely.
Because that's an entry point.
Right. And even if they fall to the ground, they should be disposed of.
Oh, yeah.
Sanitation is huge in the garden. That broken fruit will grow, let's say, funguses that can get into other fruit on your tree, or bacteria, or attract those slugs. Slugs and snails love citrus, and give them something to eat and give them a nice introduction to your tree.
Roof rats have good noses, too.
That's true.
Yeah, they could spot it, too. It's also an opening for diseases like alternaria rot and other fungi and bacteria. Yeah, if you got splitting oranges, get rid of them.
If you're using time-release fertilizer, I would put half as much as is recommended in the container, and then watch the plant for deficiency symptoms and add more as you see those deficiency symptoms.
So there you go, Mary Jane. Yes, orange splitting does happen, and I won't say it's not your fault, but it's an abiotic disorder, so you have to be...
It's the weather.
It's the weather. It's the watering. It's the fertilization. So treat your plant well. Mulch, mulch, mulch. In USDA zones 8, 9, and 10, it's rose pruning season right now. And soon enough, after frost season passes, everyone across the country will be faced with the challenge of tackling an overgrown, aging rose bush. How best to prune that rose bush to regain maximum rose production? That's our flashback episode of the week, Rose Pruning for Maximum Roses. We've got rose pruning tips as well as advice for the best tools to use and clothes to wear while pruning those prickly roses. If you missed it, give it a listen. It's our flashback episode of the week, episode 162, originally aired in January of 2022. It's entitled Principles, Rose Pruning for Maximum Roses. Find a link to it in today's show notes or at the podcast player of your choice. And you can find it along with a transcript at our homepage, gardenbasics.net. The Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast comes out once a week on Fridays, and it's brought to you by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. The Garden Basics podcast is available wherever podcasts are handed out, and that includes our homepage, gardenbasics.net, and that's where you can also find transcripts of most episodes as well. Thank you so much for listening or reading.